Video games have come a long way since the Atari, and are now a $1 million market warranting the public eye, as what was once a niche has become a viable and sustainable market. With public interest in video games surging, so too is the market for free-to-play video games. These games are all free to download, with the payment for the game being through microtransactions within the game, wherein you spend real-life currency to buy in-game currency that allows you to access features, buy in-game items, or speed up the process, or processes, in the game. This business model is called freemium, as the games are free, but the consumer is offered the option of paying money for features. This is where the problem arises. The company must craft a way that makes the player want to or feel the need to pay microtransactions to make a profit. It is this necessity that has led to business practices and game design that has become increasingly toxic in the gaming world. But before we look into how the business model affects both gamers and the market, let's first see how it gained popularity. For this examination, I will be focusing on two titles, Farmville and Dungeon Keeper for the iOS. This model was first popularized by Farmville. We all know Farmville and how popular it became, but what was it about Farmville that made it so popular and profitable? The answer to this question is fairly simple: social obligations. Farmville thrived off of being the perfect game crafted for Facebook, tying players together with notices that tell the player that their neighbor has sent them a gift. This triggers reciprocity, as the first player does not want to seem unkind to the second player, and creates a loop between the two that binds them to the game. With this use of reciprocity, the game developers Zynga have created more opportunities for their potential customers to spend real money, as the consumer will constantly get back on Farmville. This, coupled with the main gameplay mechanic of planting crops and harvesting them after a certain amount of time, usually in increments of an hour or a full day, to earn ribbons that the game gives out for certain actions. It is this constant tending of crops and waiting to harvest and earn ribbons that led players to get addicted to the game. If you have any interest in seeing how bad this addiction could get, I urge you to watch one case in 2010 where a woman addicted to Farmville went on to Dr. Phil to discuss her addiction. But just because a person is constantly going to the game does not mean that they will spend money on the game. As a matter of fact, during the Design, Innovate, Communicate, Entertainment Summit, otherwise known as DICE, chief game designer of Zynga, Brian Reynolds, dropped some interesting data. Firstly, social games cost between $100,000 to $300,000 to make, much cheaper than your standard AAA title. Secondly, between 3 and 5% of people who play social games pay money for virtual goods in the game, or sign up for advertising offers that generate cash to the developer. And finally, that Farmville is played by 31 million people every day. It's interesting to note that only 1,550,000 out of the 31 million have used money on Farmville. But what is more interesting is that at the time of this event, Zynga was valued at $3 billion. With this information, it's easy to see how small developers could be drawn to this business model, as these games are far cheaper and simpler to design. This would be all well and good if the games were not abusive in design, and focused on being a game rather than a vessel for the extraction of cash of those that they've gotten addicted to the medium. This is where things can get really ugly, and I know no better example of this business model going too far than Dungeon Keeper for the iOS, developed by Bullfrog Productions and published by Electronic Arts. Unlike Farmville, Dungeon Keeper was not built as a social game on Facebook, but rather an iOS title. This switch from social gaming to mobile gaming is an important one to note, as it is a switch from an established user base to a new market. This change could be seen as a risk, but according to the National Purchasing Diary Group, known as the NPD Group, 20% of the gaming market is in mobile gaming. With this information, it's easy to see why more companies would want to get into this market. Even further, it is equally easy to see how a large publisher would want to tap into this market with a game that appeals to a broader demographic being free to play. I assume it was these aspects that led EA to create a game with the intention of being free to play. I say intention, as the end result of the game was far from free to play. As an example, just look at this gameplay. As you can see, the main gameplay of Dungeon Keeper for iOS is building a dungeon, but instead of just allowing the player to build a dungeon as they please, Bullfrog Productions set timers on the blocks that could be mined. What this clip is showing is that it would take 4 hours for that one block to be mined, but the player spent money to finish the block early. This is the main gameplay trap that Dungeon Keeper employs, much like Farmville, in that it tests the player's patience in hopes that it will wear them down and they will pay money to get the objective done faster. But the problem is, Dungeon Keeper doesn't just slow the player down, it outright stops the player, essentially saying, if you want to continue, you must continue to pay. Jim Sterling, a gaming journalist, once called this type of game design free to wait. This describes Dungeon Keeper to a T, as you can't really play the game without paying. You can only wait to play the game without paying. Now, this is a serious problem, but it's not the sole problem that makes Dungeon Keeper my example for the pinnacle of corruptibility for free-to-play games, but rather the pricing model that Dungeon Keeper has adopted. In the game, there are blocks that take up to a day to mine, if not paid to quicken the process. As the hardest blocks to mine, they also cost the most to speed up. Well, the best value package for gems, which is the microtransaction currency that you can buy, is 14,000 gems for $99.99. Yes, you heard me correctly. A free-to-play game has an option to pay $100 for it out of the gate. Now, you might be thinking, well, that's a lot of gems. I mean, 14,000 is quite a large number. But it's completely arbitrary. If you calculate out how many of these hardest-to-mine blocks are able to be mined quickly through the best value package, you get 56. Yes, only 56 blocks can be mined for $100. So, in a game that claims to be free-to-play, you can either wait 56 days, essentially 2 months of your life, or pay $100 to get the same result. The pure gall that any game believes that it's worth that much money for that little gameplay is utterly disgusting. But it is this style of game that has become more and more present, with the likes of Clash of Clans, Simpsons Tapped Out, and many others taking the same principle of making the player wait to be allowed to play the free game, each with their own microtransactions that prey on the impatient and are nearly essential to play the game in a timely fashion, or without hitting a roadblock set in place by the development team. They set arbitrary prices on their currency and make it seem like a deal by inflating the amount of in-game currency that you get for the small amount of real-world money that you pay. The saddest part of all of this is that even though the monetization of these games is in a terrible place, with a horrible structure made only to suck out as much money from the consumer that they can before the consumer moves on, according to a joint study conducted by Ipsos Media CT and Interactive Software Federation of Europe in 2012, more than half of the European market is made up of free-to-play games. If anything, one thing is clear: free-to-play games are not going anywhere anytime soon, and as long as companies are able to make these free-to-wait games, they will continue. Regardless of your personal enjoyment of these games, I hope that this video has explained to you the troubles that can come along with this free-to-play model. And I really hope that next time you're looking through the Google Play Store or Apple's App Store, you think about why you're enjoying them, and more, if you're being pushed into buying into these microtransactions. And most importantly of all, is if the game is truly free, or just a fallacy. Thanks for watching.